Hello and welcome to the IslesNation podcast. I'm Pete Trzaskowski, also known as at IslesNation. I'm joined today by Mike Rankowski and making his long-awaited return, Carey Haber. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well, Pete. How about yourself?
Doing all right. Carey, how are you?
Doing well, glad to be back, but kind of a somber week for us, I think, as it pertains to this show.
And we didn't miss a beat anyway when Carey wasn't here. Let's be honest, Pete.
That's what I hear, but I'm
Might
glad to be back anyway.
might have been our highest rated show to date.
Our boy Ramos stepped in, and pretty sure to say that Ramos got some rave reviews. Once Carey hasn't seen in months, but
Hey, you know what? I like a high bar, so
So on Sunday we recapped the series. So today we'll look at it more at a macro level and recap the season as a whole. Obviously, the Islanders' second straight year with over 100 points. This year they finished fourth in the Metropolitan Division, first wild card spot in the East, won a playoff round for the first time in 23 years against the Florida Panthers, and then lost in 5 to the Tampa Bay Lightning. A series that was closer than the 5 games indicates, but the Islanders just couldn't get it done. So, started off on a general level. What do you guys think of the season as a whole, general impressions, and how do you leave feeling after this season? Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, overall, they if you look at it just as at the playoff results, they've made progress. They got past the first round. It was 23 years. A lot of excitement over that. That was a very good thing. But I think overall, and I'm curious to hear what both your opinions are. I think we were better last year as a whole as a team, and I think it just came down to matchups, which is nothing to apologize for. That's how the system broke out this year. We were fortunate to be in the Atlantic Division against a Florida team which was probably very similar to our position the last couple of years. A lot of inexperience from the younger guys that they were expecting to essentially carry the load. So I thought regular season we were a worse team. I thought we've got much better goaltending this year as again opposed to last year. I thought our special teams were very good this year in the regular season as opposed to last year where the penalty kill was near the bottom of the league for the majority of the season. So then the end results are obviously, hey, we had 100 points this year, 101 last year, and it doesn't matter if you look pretty doing it, as long as you do it. But I think most fans would probably agree that we just seem to be a better team last year. But the results were there this year in the playoffs, and that's all that matters. So I was happy with the playoff round victory. I was disappointed how the season ended against Tampa Bay. As you mentioned, Pete, I thought both games, or the series as a whole, especially the 2 games in Brooklyn, obviously overtime are coin flips. The Islanders win one or two or both those games. We probably are previewing a game 7 here, essentially. So that's it's. I was happy with the playoff victory, happy with the playoff progress. Disappointed because I think most people thought we would had a better chance against Tampa Bay than we would have been against the Metropolitan Division. And listen, we know there's no guarantee we're going to be here next year. It took us 23 years to even get to round 2, so we can't just assume that next year we're going to take another step. So overall, definitely some positives to build on, but disappointed how it ended, and disappointed that after 9 seasons of a quote-unquote Garth Snow era, we only have one playoff round victory to show so far.
I think it's a weird season to judge because I do agree with Mike that pretty much no matter how you slice it, during the regular season, the 2014-15 team was better than the 2015-16 team. And, I think that a lot of that is due to obviously some players, some younger players not progressing the way that the team expected them to, and I think a lot of us expected them to. We saw what turned out to be a fairly major decline, I think, from Johnny Boychuk, which was pretty unexpected in the first year of his contract. But at the same time, obviously the team, won a playoff series, like you said, and from a holistic standpoint in terms of including the playoffs and the evaluation, I think it's obviously somewhat of a success. This is something that the team hasn't done in a very long time, and I think that needs to be taken into account. So it's difficult to judge. How I would really say is I think over the course of the 11 playoff games, there were a lot of flaws that really started to show themselves, and I think it's very clear at this point what needs to be done during the offseason for this team to take the next step. Whereas in past years, with the first round exits and not making the playoffs, it may not have been as clear. I think it's very clear at this point, what the Islanders need to do to get to a level that Tampa and Pittsburgh and Washington are. So I think that, I think that's helpful, obviously, and I don't know if that would have really shown itself so much, had they lost to Florida. I think it would have been a lot more convoluted that way. One of the main things that I really wanted to want to focus on is I felt like the team didn't really have so much of an identity through large quantities of this season. I think there was I don't want to say panic, but I do want to say that there were some very clear adjustments made to the style of the way they played after the Washington series, and I don't think they best suited this team, and I think that really kind of showed itself throughout the course of the regular season. And, as you saw during the playoffs, the Islanders really started to open things up, during the Tampa series, and that's really the way that I think they need to play. And I think despite the fact that they lost in 5, I think those were the best games that they played pretty much all season. So, I was pretty encouraged by that, and the thing that I hope is the big takeaway here is that that's the style that they need to get back to playing, over 82 games as opposed to this dump it in, grind it out style, which I think most, if not all of us, would agree that the team isn't really best suited for.
I had mentioned the other night that to get to one of your points, Carey, about we're really not sure what this team is. And I'll even take it a step further. I agree, and I had mentioned the other night we're not really a finesse team because we have some high-skilled offensive plays, but not a team similar to Tampa Bay where they seem to have 3 lines full of those type of players. We're not a real bruising type of team outside of the 4th line, which really is the only line that consistently throws their weight around. We're not a particularly fast team. Again, we have some quick guys, but I think overall we're not a really fast team. We don't really do anything particularly great. We don't do anything particularly terrible either. I think part of what maybe the team was trying to build was we can play all different types of hockey identity. Now, I don't think they were particularly great doing that overall. I think they had some moments, but I just think that the collection of talent, there's no one emphasis on a certain type of player or style of player. I think whether by design or just that's how the roster shook out, I just think that this team has a little bit of everything, but not great at anything. And so it's tough to hang your hat on. And yeah, they did seem to generate more offense against Tampa Bay, but I think that was also part because Tampa Bay invited them to do that. I think they would have liked to have done that against Florida, but Florida trapped more, and the Islanders were buried in their zone for periods at a time. So by the chance when they actually got out of the zone, they needed to just get off and change. So I don't know this season. I still don't know what we are, and I don't know if that's good or bad. But I agree with you. I don't think we have an identity. There's not anything we can hang our hats on as our calling card. We're not great defensively. We're not great at any one aspect. We're just a solid overall team. Do solid overall teams make deep playoff runs? I don't know, but that's again, I guess what we will try to find out over the next several seasons.
Yeah, the thing that I've noticed, a trend, I guess, of the teams that are left, and there's 5 left now, but if you take a look at the 8 teams that made it to the second round, a good portion of them have a dynamic 1-2 punch down the middle. San Jose does, Washington does, Pittsburgh does. You can go on and on. Dallas does, and I think that's really the one thing that I noticed that the Islanders don't necessarily have, which is they really have one legitimate scoring line. And even when Franz Nielsen wasn't playing left wing and he was playing center, he's used in more defensive capacity. So, why would any coach match up their top defensive pairings against that? Either way, what you're doing is, placing your top pairing against John Tavares. And we obviously know that Victor Hedman did a great job in the Tampa Bay series against Tavares. So, to me, that's actually one of the big things that I feel really needs to be touched up on. And there's a debate that we had offline about center versus wing, and but either way, I mean, what it comes down to is if you're only going to have one scoring threat, once you get to this point in the playoffs, you're relatively easy to defend because most of the teams that are left at this point have a very legitimate, if not elite, number one defenseman on their team. So, the thing that I think is the big takeaway here is this team needs to be more dynamic. I agree with you, Mike, that they are good at pretty much every aspect of the game, but they're not great at pretty much any aspect of the game. And, the thing that I think has the most room to improve that's, I think, attainable during this offseason is a high-level scorer. There are names out there, and the Islanders need to essentially find a way to get one of them.
No, I would agree with that, and I think a lot of the fact that the Islanders didn't really have a secondary scoring combination comes from the fact that after last year, like you guys spoke about, there was a lot of hope and room for improvement, and we expected guys like Ryan Strome and Anders Lee and Brock Nelson to step up. And I mean, Brock Nelson statistically had a better year than he did last year, but I mean, if you watched him play down the stretch, and especially in the playoffs, Brock Nelson wasn't good enough. Anders Lee, he went from 25 goals to 15 this year. I mean, he was still a solid power play net front presence, decent player. I mean, he's obviously has a role on this team, but he wasn't as good as he was last year. And then Ryan Strome had a colossal, a terrible sophomore year. I mean, I'm pretty sure I don't have it in front of me, the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure he almost halved his points, if that. Pretty sure he was around 30 points. I don't know if any of you guys have it offhand, but he scored over 50 in his rookie year. And Carey said the 1-2 punch up the middle. I'm pretty sure Garth and the Islander fan base expected that 1-2 punch to be Tavares and Strome. And I know Strome didn't play any center this year. He played a lot of wing. He played a little more center last year, but he was still predominantly a winger. So, I mean, I know you guys want to improve the 1-2 punch down the middle, but guys like Strome and Nelson, they came up as centers. And one of them, we'd expect one of them to come up and be able to control the second line, and neither of them did. And that, to me, was one of the more disappointing parts of the year. This team
Yeah,
was carried not by the scoring of guys like Strome and Nelson and Lee, but more by their goaltending, which, I mean, isn't a bad thing. But, I mean, you relied on Thomas Greiss to give you a career year. And just with that career year, you just got back to where you were last year.
yeah, and actually, Pete, Strom had 28 points this year after having 50 last season. So you're right, he nearly halved his point total, and obviously this season also included a demotion down to Bridgeport early in the season. And I think you are hit on it and are accurate in that our 1-2 punch, I think anyway, was supposed to have been, at least in the minds of management after last season, was Tavares and Strom. Those are supposed to be the 1-2 guy. You obviously know what you're going to get from Tavares on an annual basis. He's going to be your leading point getter. He's going to be the focus of other teams' defense. Very good on the power play, can take over games. I mean, you know what you're getting from him. It's what he's been the last several seasons. He's a superstar. And I think after last year, Ryan Strome, I think many fans as well agreed that he was, 50 points last year would have been the floor this year. You were expecting 60 or 65 and really to take his game to another level. I mean, I remember we had a discussion, I think even on this podcast before the season started, we were talking about, well, should we worry about signing other guys because we got to give Ryan Strome this massive contract extension over the next 2 years, and we got to make sure we plan accordingly. I mean, thank God management didn't listen to us and give him some 5 or 6 year long-term deal for big money, because it would have looked really foolish right now. And all he really deserves at this point is a qualifying offer, which is all he should get. So yes, we definitely need a 1-2. Definitely need a second half of a 1-2 punch. I'm all for another center, a top quality center, and we will get into that discussion, I think, probably more in the next episode, maybe next week, about possible acquisitions to help fill that void. But I do think management had very high hopes for Ryan Strome in particular, and I think that's the biggest. Definitely Strome, Nelson, and Lee were the biggest disappointments, but I think Strome really stood out because he has the skill level. You thought he was really going to take that next step and be maybe a 60-point guy, give you quality defense, can do a little bit of everything, and he just, for whatever reason, fell off the planet essentially, and it was very disappointing, and one of the reasons why all season this team struggled to generate any type of consistent offense after that top line.
This
Yeah, I
goes
think
back to our first point about the style of play. It's kind of a chicken and egg type of thing. Did the fact that the Islanders played a more dump and chase, relaxed defensive system, did that hurt guys like Strom and Nelson and Lee? Or is the fact that they couldn't contribute the reason the Islanders played that system? It's kind of a chicken and egg type of thing. I wonder what
uh,
you guys
yeah,
think.
I think it's a mixture of both. In the sense that obviously we've seen the studies and we know that dumping it in generally leads to less shots for. And I do think that was an issue. Again, that all starts from the defense, and there were certainly guys, on the defense that struggled with breakouts this year. Um, at the same time, the Islanders were not playing a system that was really conducive to, the way that it was last year with the center, up high and leading the charge, off the touch pass and stuff. So, from that standpoint, I agree. But, on the second side, the other side of it, I think we've kind of learned a valuable lesson when you get to this, you know, area of the life cycle as a franchise, which is you really can't not be prepared for the sophomore slump. And it was different 5, 6 years ago when, guys like Josh Bailey and Kyle Oposo struggled as kids essentially because, at the end of the day, it didn't really matter because the team around them wasn't that good anyway. So everyone was kind of just content to let them develop and whatnot. And it was frustrating, obviously, but at the end of the day, like they didn't have the horses. It's different now. I mean, now this team, it was expected to. I mean, they were expected to do what they did. I don't want to take that away from them, but at the same time, you can't help but feel that there were things that we were missing this year, and a lot of it was dependent on Strome and Lee. And I'm hesitant to use Nelson in terms of the regular season because he did score 26 goals. So really more so on the Strome and Lee front, who are expected to do more. And I think a large part of that was a lesson learned, which is, hey, like, when you get to this point when you're expected to be a perennial 100-point team, maybe, it's not best to just simply rely on youth. And you guys know that I was pretty much totally in favor of how the offseason shook out. But at the end of the day, it's hard to call it a mistake just because of the playoff result, but it's also easy to call it a mistake because who knows what would have happened. Sky is, the limit had they maybe done some other things. So it's tough to say just because, of the round that they won, etc. But I think to be fair, there's another side of it too that definitely needs to be touched upon.
Yeah, and I know before, and I won't speak for Pete here. I know he'll chime in, and I'm confident he'll agree. Before the season started, we had spoken offline, and I was very concerned about the lack of activity in the off season. And I think we all understood that the plan was to have the natural, hopefully the natural progression of the younger players, and their big summer acquisition, for lack of better phrase. Um, And I was concerned. I know Pete was concerned. Several other of us who really, who talk about the team frequently were concerned that that's probably not the best way to go because you're giving yourself no safety net. And you're expecting a bunch of 22, 23-year-old, 24-year-olds to all step up. And while that happens often for a lot of players, it doesn't necessarily happen all the time. And obviously the odds were you'd hope at least two of those three would take the next step, and if not all three. And at best you could say was one of them kind of gave you what you expected in Nelson. And again, even and that's just really on the stat sheet. I think anyone who watched the season progress would tell you that Nelson was not very impactful for the entire season by any stretch. So I think it goes back, to, as you mentioned, Carey, and kind of alluded to really the offseason last year where the Garth Snow failed to bring in any type of secondary scoring, a guy like Justin Williams or a guy like TJ Oshie, the team like the Capitals, that they went out and last year obviously they lost in Game 7 to the Rangers in the second round, and in a series they clearly could have won if one or two things broke their way. But they were not satisfied, and they went out and added some additional pieces. And I know you could say, well, it didn't help them in the playoffs. They actually, didn't go any further. But regular season, they won the President's Trophy. So um, it was disappointing because those guys obviously the three youngsters really didn't take that big step forward. But did we put them in the best position to succeed? And I think that's debatable, and I would err on the side of I don't think we did it all. I think we kind of we kind of threw them into the water without any type of a life preserver, and it bit us in the ass this year.
Yeah, so I think that's a point about the Capitals, which is, obviously you bring in players, you're not going to guarantee success, and I don't think that you're making that point, but I do think it's an important clarification to make because there's a difference between guaranteeing success and maximizing your chances for success. And I think we all agree that, the offseason that the Capitals had, there was a lot of agreement that that's what they did. They maximized their chance for success, and they obviously had a very strong regular season. They won the President's Trophy, and in playoff series, you're talking about 5 to 7 games for the most part, and it's hockey. Bounces happen, and sometimes you don't get them, and when you don't get them, you're not going to win. And the Penguins are a very strong team, and that's what happened to them. But I don't think that means that their off season or their season is necessarily a failure, despite what the expectations are. And I think as that pertains to the Islanders, it's at this point where the Islanders are. I see them in actually as a very similar position as where the Capitals were after last season. They made the second round. They have a superstar on their team, and it's very clear at this point that they have some unrestricted free agents. There's going to be turnover. They went out and got guys via trade and free agency that they felt were upgrades to their team. That's exactly where the Islanders are right now. They have unrestricted free agents. We'll talk, I think, probably next week on whether we should, bring some of them back or not. But I think the thing that we can all agree on is there needs to be an injection of high-end talent that comes into this team after, the flaws that were exploited by both Florida and Tampa Bay for that matter. I mean, the Florida series was, to be fair, won by two players, and that's not necessarily a good way to go through the playoffs. So I think the Capitals example that you bring up is a good one because I really feel that that's generally the exact place where the Islanders are now, and I think that's if there was any offseason to try to build, continue momentum as an organization and whatnot, I think this is the one to do it.
To be fair, I don't think we're quite at the point the Capitals are. I mean, the Capitals have an elite goalie in Holtby, and they have some higher-end talent that was signed, including guys like Backstrom. But the main reason they were as good as they were is because Kuznetsov really stepped up, and the Islanders need that from their young players, which is what we just touched on. Someone like Strome needs to take that next step to become Tavares's. You know what I'm trying to say. I can't put it into words, but the guy behind Tavares that steps
Yeah,
up and plays.
basically the Robin to the Batman. That's what you want.
Exactly.
You want that second line guy who can carry the load. and essentially relieve pressure off the top line to do everything.
And how you get there is by having productive, high quality veterans around them. And we're not talking about at this point the Nikolai Kulemans. We're talking, higher end players, guys like a TJ Oshie, who is a higher end player that, provides depth up and can make play on different lines and whatnot, and has the ability to score a lot. And that's exactly the type of guy that they need to bring in, because those are the types of guys that are going to ultimately maximize what Ryan Strome can do. It's not going to be guys like Kuhlman or Grabowski or these solid middle six players, but they're not. At the end of the day, these guys are not difference makers, and they need difference makers at this point.
Speaking of guys like Kuhlman and Grabowski, I mean, those guys, obviously the youngsters, the trio of youngsters we've touched on, they were disappointed in not taking that next step. But, I mean, another reason why, again, possibly, and I'm not trying to make excuses for those three guys, but another potential reason why those three guys didn't take that next step forward was the veteran secondary scoring essentially was inconsistent at best throughout the year. Kuhlman had a worse season than his first year here. Grabowski, at this point, as you know, you hate to say it, but there's a good chance his concussion history is just going to prevent him from ever being a consistent contributor in the league again. And he's not an old guy by any stretch, but that's a sad thing for him. Josh Bailey continued to be Josh Bailey, which is wildly inconsistent, coupled with maybe 1 or 2 weeks of really strong play, and then you have people tell me how great he is. But those guys, even Franz Nielsen, when he wasn't on the top line, he had a rough period as the season wore on. So those guys, where you would hope you would get a little bit more consistent production from those 4, 5, 6 guys, it just was never there. And as Carey alluded to, those are not the type of guys they're not the offensive threats that are going to extract the best out of some of the other players. And they're not those consistent threats that are going to force opposing teams to really focus on them. And those are a couple of big contracts sprinkled in there that if the Islanders are going to want to take that next step and acquire some of these veteran leadership / veteran producers and add on to the current team, the Islanders are going to have to get creative with trying to get rid of some of those contracts, which I know we'll discuss next week. But the secondary scoring from those veteran guys was also disappointing this season. It really was. The entire secondary scoring, whether they were youngsters or the veterans, was just bad this year. And it is somewhat surprising the team even got to 100 points, to be quite honest.
Well, it was goaltending, right? I mean, ultimately that was the difference maker. Thomas Greiss and Yaro Halak, while he was healthy, kind of almost jerry-rigged their way into being a top 10 tandem in terms of like save percentage and stuff like that. Again, I think part of this obviously is due to players not executing and not playing as well, and I also think part of this is the fact that the system was changed. And I feel like for a lot of this season, the Islanders were a team without a real style of play, almost like we'll just play however the game is going, which, the merits of that I think are understandable, but I don't necessarily agree with it. I think, you look at the teams left, and if I asked you, define how these 5 teams play hockey, you can do that without thinking about it. If I asked you to say, how do the Islanders play hockey, it's more difficult to answer, and I think that's a problem. I mean, this team needs a style of play that they, stick to. They bring in players that fit that style of play, and, that they cultivate over time. A lot of the teams that are left have been in the playoffs for a long period of time at this point, and a lot of them have cultivated these, styles of play and systems over time, and they bring in players that fit that system. And that, to me, was a fundamental change from last year to this year. And I think a lot of that was reaction to the Washington series, and I'd like to see them reverse course on that and go back to, the way that they were cultivating that system from, say, 2012 to 2015, which was a high energy, fast paced team. No, they don't have the fastest skaters, but they move the puck awfully quick and, really try to play a running gun style. That's the style that this team has been most successful for years. And you saw glimpses of that during the Tampa series, for example. And I think that they bring in players that can play that kind of hockey and they stick to it. I think they'll be much better for it next year.
So yeah, we pretty much have touched on this throughout the show, but I mean, biggest surprises for you guys, not only positive, maybe shocking surprises, things that went a way you guys didn't expect. And that for me comes down to the fact that the Islanders, they didn't really, I mean, if you asked me in the start of the year how this season would play out, I would not even come close to painting the picture of what actually happened. I mean, Thomas Greiss carried this team throughout the year, with Halak obviously splitting time at the start of the year until Halak got hurt. But then Greiss really carried this team. And I mean, if you look up and down the lineup, there's not one player on this roster that you could actually say exceeded expectations outside of Thomas Greiss. And I mean, at this point, me and Mike touched on this a little earlier on Sunday night when we recapped the series. You have to think this team pretty much is what it is at this point. I mean, how much more room do you have to grow for guys like, I know he might not be here next year, but Kyle Oposo, Josh Bailey, John Tavares. I mean, the only guys you really expect growth from at this point are Ryan Strome. I mean, Anders Lee, he's probably going to be this throughout his career, guy chipping around 20 goals. Brock Nelson's probably going to be similar to a Mark Parrish type that you don't notice him for months at a time, but at the end of the year you see he's putting up 20, 25 goals. Ryan Strome's the only guy that you could actually say you expect a big increase from, and maybe Ryan Pulak on the back end. But throughout the lineup, you see what you see, and I mean, that to me is surprising because I expected after last year, maybe it was more of a hope, but I expected things there to be a linear progression. I mean, you could argue there was a linear progression with the series win, but as Mike said, a lot of that came down to the matchup, and we kind of stole the series with Greiss and Tavares taking over. But I mean, to me, the biggest surprise up and down the lineup, even guys like Calvin DeHaan on the back end, I mean, they're just not getting better. Thomas Hickey is what he is. Travis Hamonick's a very good player, but I mean, he is what he is at this point. He's not getting much better. He hasn't gotten much better over a couple of years. Johnny Boychuk took a step backwards. So at this point, the fact that after all these years, the biggest surprise to me is I expected this team to keep getting better, but at this point, I feel like they are what they are, and that to me is a surprise.
Yeah, that's disappointing. I think more than anything, Pete, and I don't think you're wrong at all. I think it is. It's frustrating because a lot of these guys, I agree. It appears they may have plateaued. Now, if I think that, and you think that, and I'm sure there are many other people who think that, who who probably know a lot more about hockey than me and you, then to me that points to the coaching. If our team is not getting better as a whole, and the only reason why we won a series was because we had a great performance from Thomas Greiss, which was unexpected, and obviously John Tavares, carried the offensive burden on his shoulders. To me, that points to the coaching staff that they're either not developing these players properly, or they're not coaching a system that maximizes their abilities. And that is disappointing, and whether that you want to call that surprise or not, but that's disappointing to hear that, because I agree with you that a lot of these players, I don't think we're all of a sudden going to see this grand step forward for a ton of the players. I mean, you would hope that some of them who maybe struggled will have a little bit of a bounce back, but that also probably will be offset by some guys who maybe even regress further. So that, to me, that's either coaching, or again, that's, you look at the general manager and the players he's put together. And through drafting and lack of acquisitions at the deadline this year, other than Shane Prince, last deadline it was Tyler Kennedy and Michael Neuwirth, and even over the summer it was Steve Bernier and Marek Zidlicki essentially for Lubomir Brzezinski. So, we've had a general manager who's been complacent as well, I think. And Maybe people would say it's not fair to criticize because we don't know what was available and what prices, but he's in the business of results, and he doesn't get any gold stars for calling another team and inquiring about a player. He gets patted on the back for getting results, and he did not do enough. The coaching staff, I don't think, did enough with the players they had. So yeah, though that was definitely frustrating and a little bit surprising as well that they didn't progress further.
So I think there's two sides to this. I think it's unfair to say that they didn't get results because, I mean, they essentially did what everyone wanted them to do, which was they won a series. They were one of 6 teams in the league to have 100 points in back-to-back seasons. They've made the playoffs 3 out of 4 years. Big picture, things are not looking so bad. That said, I do think that there's an element of things have become a little bit stale in terms of the roster, and it might be time to make some bigger changes than have been made over the last 2 years. And it seems like that is beginning. It does not appear like the team is going to make a heavy effort, if at all, to sign Kyle Oposo. So there's going to be a change there, and it still remains to be seen if Franz Nielsen or Matt Martin resign, and that's obviously a conversation for next week. But in terms of roster staleness, I think that is something that exists, and I agree. It's time to move things around a little bit. So, that's why I think it's like this is a really tough year to evaluate, and I keep going back to that just because the team had like more tangible success than they did last year, more tangible success than they've had in quite a long period of time. But at the same time, the team itself didn't appear to be as good this year, and it's almost like a fallacy. Like they deserved more last year than they got, and deserved less this year than they got. And the thing that I just hope is that management is not blinded by that fact that, hey, we made the second round, so the roster does not need much tinkering. I think it's actually quite the opposite. Like, you have momentum as an organization now. You were, I don't want to say they were put on the map, but they definitely, I think, opened some eyes. This year, John Tavares, for some reason, was still perceived as some state secret. I don't know why, but it seemed like he was, and that seems to have changed. Everyone was commenting at the beginning of the season how much Barclays Center was a disaster, and by the end of the playoffs, it was Barclays Center has one of the best atmospheres in the NHL. This is the type of thing, these are the types of things that happen when you win, and the Islanders need to take advantage of that to take the next step and become not just a perennial playoff team, but a true Stanley Cup contender. And, again, that's why I hope they're not blinded by the fact that they were in the second round. I think this is a good opportunity for them to take that and use it to propel them to whatever that next level is.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And unfortunately, I feel like Garth Snow has a history of being blinded by results. If you think back to the lockout shortened year where the Islanders made the playoffs and played the Penguins, Snow stood pat that summer. Everyone could see that the team ran a miracle run to get into the playoffs, and over the course of an 82-game season, probably wouldn't have made it. And then the goaltending was exposed in the playoffs, and the very next year he comes back with getting Nabokov. And this past year, you saw the team falter a little. Not this past year, the 2014-15 season. You saw the team falter down a little down the stretch, and you heard some blame on injuries. And then, but Snow kind of looked at it as this team just had their best year since the Cup years, and he stood pat. So I'm really hoping that he doesn't do the same thing this year, because if you're going to let him get blinded by results, I mean, as we just said, it feels like this roster's a little stagnant. So, I mean, I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that, but I just want to touch a little on the defense. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I feel like it's a bit of a problem with this team. I feel like they have to not necessarily make big changes there, but for a team that spent a lot of money on their defense, I feel like they were a little underwhelming this season. I don't think Nick Leddy had as good of a year. I think Travis Hamonic was their best defenseman all year. I think Calvin DeHaan stagnated. At this point, you have to question whether he's a top four D-man. Johnny Boychuk, as we all said, terrible season. Not terrible might be a little strong, but he did not have a good year. Obviously, Thomas Hickey is Thomas Hickey, a bottom pairing D-man. So overall impressions on the play of the defense, because I know we touching the forwards a lot. Didn't really touch on the defense. Touching the goalies, we love their play, but the defense, what do you guys think?
Well, Travis Hamonic, I will agree, I think is their best overall defenseman, was their best overall defenseman this year. And obviously news of him rescinding his trade request was a huge load off the team. And it'll definitely, hopefully make things easier this summer to fill in the holes around them as opposed to also filling in a top four defenseman hole. I thought Letty was fine. I didn't think he was much better or worse than last year, to be quite honest. I think his point total maybe early in the season he was not getting the results offensively, but I still think he's still a fantastic skater. He's he's definitely the one guy who can go end to end on the team from the blue line, which consistently, I mean, Hammond can do it sometimes, but he's the one guy you can count on consistently to do that. I agree. I think Calvin DeHaan, I don't want to say it's time to move on from him. That's not fair. He's on a pretty very cheap contract, and even if he's a third pair in defense, then at his money, it's still a reasonable person to have around. But I think I would hope that this season or this off season they will try to find somebody else for that top four role to fill his spot. I don't know if that's for Ryan Pulak, to be quite honest. I don't know if you want to rush him, but I think at this point, assuming they don't do anything drastic on defense, I think you'd have to go with put Dahan and Hickey as the third pair, and then you kind of mix and match Pulak in the top four, and maybe some might think it's rushing him too much, but I think his offensive ability would be in this, especially how the league is going to, and over the last several seasons with the puck moving defenseman having the offense from the blue line, I think he'd be an asset. I think he'd be more of a positive than negative. So, yeah, Boychuk, as you said, he was disappointing. One of I think the disappointments of the season. Again, maybe he wasn't completely horrible, and he definitely had some injury issues mixed in, which I still think is something that affected him throughout the whole season. I do anticipate he'll be better next year. Hopefully, it's a $6 million defenseman he'll be, but I think even if he's only a top four D and not a top pair in D, I still think it's that's serviceable enough and good enough. But um, they 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 weren't great overall. I think they were bailed out a lot by their team defense, or excuse me, their goaltending made the team defense look better. But I don't think we're going to see anything drastic on defense this offseason. I think kind of the pieces we have, again, Pulak will hopefully get more minutes. Pellick, maybe if they add a depth guy, but I kind of think the defense is going to just have to have a natural progression and hopefully a return to at least a better quality from a guy like Johnny Boychuk.
Yeah, Boychuk had one of the weirdest years I think I've seen in a long time. Like year over year, it was clear from any measure, statistical eye test, that he was not as good as he was in the year prior. But yet he still managed to score 9 goals, which he did last year. He was a plus 17. He was a plus 15 last year. So like if you look at the base stats, you're like, wow, this guy had a pretty decent year. But I don't know, there was something missing from his game pretty much all season, and that was obviously very unexpected. And I know we said he wasn't hurt, but you kind of have to hope that he was, because if not, like that contract gets scary in a bad way very, very quickly. I know there's calls to trade him while they can. I get that. With the Travis Hamonic news, I think it's more palatable than if he wasn't moving, but I don't think it's realistic at all. I don't think they're going to move a guy they gave a no-move clause to after 1 year, signing a big contract. It's just not going to happen. So they really have to hope for a rebound year. And, from there, if he doesn't have one, I think maybe that would be the time to start reevaluating options. So that's kind of where I stand on Boychuk. I think Travis Hamonic and Nick Leddy make up a very, very legitimate first pairing in this league. I thought the two of them both had very, very strong seasons. I actually have to somewhat disagree with what you said earlier, Pete, in that I think Travis Hamonic proved that he was a top pairing defenseman in this league this season. I thought this was easily the best year of his career. And he is I think he's 24, 25 now, so it's pretty much right on par with what we're seeing these days with guys, in that 24 to 27 range having the best years of their career. So, like Mike said, and I know that you agree, Pete, the fact that he has rescinded his trade offer is nothing short of huge news for this franchise. So yeah, I mean, the two of them I thought were great together in the playoffs. Obviously, it left a hole at some bottom areas of the roster. I think realistically, Mike is right. You're not going to see much in the way of drastic changes on defense. I don't think Calvin DeHaan gets traded, although I could see why people want him to. I think if anything, that would be the time to do it if you could improve on offense. But I don't know how realistic that actually is. So I would anticipate that he is in the top four again next year. The only things I think that you'll see, obviously, it does not appear that Brian Strait is going to be back next year. It doesn't appear that Mary is going to be back next year. So you're looking at Adam Pelech taking over one of those spots, and I think they're going to bring in a depth guy for the other one. I don't know who that would be, but I think you're going to be looking in that $1 million to $1.5 million range for it. And it's going to be a lot of natural progression. Pulak's obviously going to have a very increased role on this team next year. He's going to be essentially in that Ryan Strome role where you're going to need a guy like that to really, to quote Capuano, step his shit up and get to the next level. I don't think anyone's expecting him to be Shea Weber overnight, but you do want to, I think, see him show that he's a top four defenseman, especially if a guy like Johnny Boychuk doesn't rebound. So overall, a pretty uneven year for the defense, but I do think that the two bright spots were Nick Leddy and Travis Hamonic, showing that they can definitely be a top pairing in this league against big time players.
It's funny. I actually do, and I don't want to get too far or too down this road because I know we'll talk about it in the future podcasts. But I actually think that trading DeHaan this summer may make a lot of sense. Obviously, if you package him with a forward or something else to get a better forward. He does have only 1 year left on his contract, but he's a restricted free agent. He's not making a ton of money. I think he has shown flashes that he could be a lower end top four defenseman given the right situation and the right pairing. So it depends obviously what they think about Pulak, how much they think he's progressed, and whether they think he's ready to take that next step. But I would not be completely shocked if DeHaan is one of those unspoken trade bait guys that one day you hear over the summer, after free agency's kind of died down, and if there's still holes to fill, I could see that being a guy that gets moved. And not to say he has a ton of value, but couple him with somebody else, and I think especially for a team maybe like Edmonton who's looking for defense. Or a team who doesn't have a lot of cap space that still needs to fill a defenseman role, a serviceable defenseman. Again, he's not making a lot of money this year. He's a restricted free agent after this season, so you really have him under control for at least 2 years. You could probably get a long-term deal done with him at that point. So I think he actually I would not be shocked if he's a guy that's on the move this summer. A summer from the pool of guys that we're maybe not that we're thinking are going to be dealt anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if they are going to trade him, this is the right time to trade him. Just because, again, to your point, he's a restricted free agent after next year, not making a lot now, and so obviously his next contract is probably going to be a bigger one. There's obviously, and this isn't confirmed, but there's obviously the expansion draft angle where you don't want to lose a guy like that for nothing. And yeah, I mean, it comes into this. If they trade him, that's fine, but you have to be prepared to backfill him with a left defenseman that is essentially an improvement. And there's two guys out there that would be that, and that's Keith Yandel and Alex Goligoski, and both are going to cost a lot of money, and both are going to have a lot of suitors. But I think if you can make that happen, essentially bring in a forward, using DeHaan as a piece, and then bring in a defenseman like that into your top four, you are a better team. So that's why I don't want to make it seem like I think that DeHaan is like untouchable or untradeable or anything like that. That's by no means the case. I just don't know if realistically it's something that we can expect to happen.
Yeah, but you're not going to trade DeHaan and then sign a guy like Keith Yandle. The point is, you expect a guy like Pulak to take over a top four role, and you
They play different positions though. Pulak's not going to play left D. Like they leave a pretty big hole on left defense if they trade DeHaan because your left D depth is Letty Hickey, and Pellick. Like you have to improve off that. Put your right D is Hamonic, Boychuk, Pulak.
I don't think they're going to be they will be players for a guy like Goligoski or Yandel. That's just my opinion. I think if they
No, you
trade,
might be right, and if that's the case, then I really would advise against trading DeHaan unless you're really, really improving it forward. And again, I don't know how realistic that is, obviously, without knowing the market.
So don't want to talk too much about the future. We'll talk about that in the future. But overall, did you guys think this was a successful season? Yes or no?
Yeah, I think it was a successful season. You mentioned it before. In terms of linear progression, they obviously progressed. They got to the second round of the playoffs. I think they built some good momentum for themselves as a franchise. By no means would I say this is a perfect season. I don't know if it was even a better season in terms of like start to finish. But if you're going to ask me, like, what was my expectation before the season? It was they needed to go further in the playoffs, and they did that. So, you know, I, I don't know if we realistically expected them to win the Stanley Cup, but I definitely think they met expectations, and by that standpoint, I would deem the season a success. But what that means is the bar again goes higher next year. I mean, this team really needs to be in the top four next year for 2016-17 to be a success. But for this year, yeah, I think it's a success.
it's it's weird because how they played this entire season and with the regression, I think of a few key guys, you can make the argument it was a successful season. The fact that they got to the second round, and if you want to say that, I think that's completely defensible. But when you look at the entire picture of a group of years with some of these same guys, and to only get to this point, that I think makes this not a successful season in that regard. If you're looking at it as, over the last 5 years, the best we've done is one playoff round victory. I think I'll say the era as of now is not a success, but the individual season, especially how it went from what we expected, I will say was a success. But I think overall it just leaves a lot to be desired. It's a step, and again, if we're just talking progression, that's a good thing. But I think most people, most fans, do have and should have higher expectations after such a long period of futility. That one playoff round victory should not kind of be the end all be all for the majority of these of fans.
No, I would agree with that. And it might sound asinine, but I feel like once all the emotions stopped, I feel like I walked away out of last year with a better feeling about this team than I walked away from this year. Because last year you saw young guys step up, and there was hope, and you expected things to get better. But this year, I mean, like I said earlier, feels like a stagnant group right now. And they did win their first playoff series in 23 years, but as I've said before, there's a reason that the Islanders pretty much tanked last weekend of the season. They don't win their first playoff round in 23 years. If they win that Sunday game against the Flyers, they probably suffer a very similar fate to the Rangers. So, I mean, if you want to base the whole season on a playoff series in that aspect, yes, it was a success. But, I mean, big picture, you look at the team still playing right now. You look at Tampa, even without their best player, Steven Stamkos, and a top pairing D-man and Anton Strawman, the Islanders still couldn't beat them. You look at teams like Pittsburgh and Washington and St. Louis and Chicago and LA, who were eliminated in the first round in the West. Even a team like San Jose, you realize how far the Islanders really have to go. And I mean, that's more of a big picture type of thing, but that's a taste I leave in my mouth after this year. So I would consider it a success, but I'm not exactly beaming from that success.
Yeah, I think this group, for the most part, if there's not significant changes, which hopefully there will be, but if this is the core group to begin next season with a few, additions that are not significant, then I think that it's a group that has plateaued, and I would not anticipate them get into that, as Carey mentioned, that top four in the conference, or as Pete mentioned, being at the level of some of these teams still playing. If they go out and they add bigger pieces, then yeah, then I think we will feel pretty decent about our chances. But I agree with Pete. The first thing you kind of mentioned was you kind of left this season in a little bit of a, okay, well, that's it. Like, that's, if this is the best the group has to offer, and where's the improvement coming from, then that's kind of crummy. At least after last season, there were some players where you expected that next step. So maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised next year. Maybe guys like Strom and Nelson and Lee will all kind of take two steps forward. And maybe Boychuk will be back to being the 14-15 Boychuk, and Dahan will play better. And we've been surprised before with this team, so maybe that's the path. This year we expected one thing, we got something else. Maybe next year the bar will be, we will have one expectation and we'll go beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, as you know, I tend to take a more optimistic view of the team and where the team is at. But the one thing I agree with is it is definitely time for turnover. It is definitely time for this team to take the next step. And the first step to doing that, I think, is frankly some paper transactions where they bring in higher end players. I think this is the time to do that. And as optimistic as I am, I kind of feel the same way you do, where if significant improvements are not brought in over the offseason, I will also kind of be left wondering if, this is kind of what they are, a first, second round playoff team every year, which is nice, I guess, but ultimately that's not why any of these guys are here. They're here to, win the Stanley Cup, and this team, I think, when I say I'm more optimistic, I do think this team is closer to being a contender than I think you guys do, but it's not going to happen organically. I think that much has proven itself out. They are going to need to bring in guys that are higher end players to make that happen, and um, that's ultimately, I think, a huge takeaway that we found out over the last 11 games of the playoffs is that basically that they are missing, one or two of those players.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the team on the ice, and a big part of this team going into this season was obviously the transition from Long Island Nassau Coliseum to the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. So I think a good way to end the show would be to talk about that transition and how it went throughout the course of the year. What are you guys' overall impressions? I know Carey had a ticket plan there, spent a lot of time there. I know me and Mike have been there a few times. So not only from the arena itself and how the game viewing experience is, but no way. But
Really? Wow.
Thor just hit his second home run. That's the reaction. But so yeah, just not only put off the ice, how Yormark handled things, how things went. What did you guys think of the Barclays in Brooklyn the first year?
It's clearly started off very rocky with the preseason, with the black uniforms, with the goal horn, with it just seemed like they were not equipped or did not have any knowledge and did no studies to what the Islander fans really were passionate about, or even hockey fans as a whole. Um, there was a whole fiasco about they weren't going to allow fans down towards the glass for warm-ups, and then they were only going to allow 91 ticket holders to do so, and you needed to get special passes, and eventually they relented on that as well. So I think this year was a learning process for the Barclays. Um, you're right, Pete. I wasn't there as much as Carey was, but from everything you read, it definitely seems like they learned on the fly, and at least you could say they improved. It's better that they went that direction than obviously got then the other direction got worse with everything. So to their credit, it seemed like Brett Yormark and the entire staff over there kind of realized hockey's not basketball. It's a different type of fan they're catering to, different product they're catering to. And I thought by the playoffs they really kind of had it down pat. And clearly they're gonna. And I think even Yormark sent out a letter today to a lot of the season ticket holders, kind of thanking them, and kind of next year will be better. And I think they will be. I think they'll continue to improve. And the one thing people, you may not like Brent Yormark for some of the marketing ideas he has and the whole Brooklyn angle, but they're smart businessmen. I think they understand the potential here to make a lot of money, and whether or not they are hockey fans, Islander fans, or whatnot, they're all fans of money. So I think they'll figure it out a way to maximize profits, but also give the fans more of what they want going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a rocky start. There's no question they tried to do things that the fan base was rightfully upset about. But, by the time April came around, I thought it was a really great experience. I thought the playoffs were a ton of fun. It was a great atmosphere. I don't think I know a lot of people try to compare it to the Coliseum. I don't know. It's not a fair comparison. They're two completely different experiences. I thought for a new modern building, what we saw in the first and second round were nothing short of phenomenal. So, yeah, I mean, and the other aspect of it too, again, like Mike said, a lot of people don't like Brett Yormark. He gets a lot of flack, but I gotta tell you, the Islanders were represented in and around New York City more than they ever had been. I work in Manhattan. I walk down Fifth Avenue, to catch a train, and there is a bus that has John Tavares' face blown up on it with, come to the Barclays Center to see the New York Islanders. That never happened before this year. And so I think there's a lot of, I think there's a ton of growth. I think we saw it. Um, it's another great anecdote, I think a lot of people didn't realize at first, at the beginning of the year, the staff, they weren't into the games. They didn't understand how things went. And then, again, that was understandable to a degree. It was new. But, man, by the time the playoffs came around, the staff, the ushers, they were so into it. You leave the building, and they're all talking about how they can't wait to watch the road games. And I just felt like the Islanders ingratiated themselves into the community more than anyone could have reasonably expected. I think that the way that they became part of the Brooklyn community was impressive. And I think that if you saw some of the articles at the end of the year from guys that write for the Nets and stuff, that like the Islanders became way more part of the Brooklyn community than the Nets are, and that I think to do that in 1 year is nothing short of a testament to how strong of a fan base this team has. I said it a couple of weeks ago. You can take the Islanders out of the Nassau Coliseum, but you can't take the Nassau Coliseum out of the Islanders. And I think that kind of showed itself in the playoffs. This team, it was a rocky start for sure, but I really feel that after, looking back on it, this team has a very, very bright future where they are right now.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, you both know I wasn't the biggest fan of Brooklyn. It's a pain to get to. I always felt the Islanders belonged at the Coliseum, but as we all know, it wasn't exactly feasible. And I made my way to 2 playoff games this year, and I'll just say, one day when I'm a real adult and I have money to spend, I feel like I would enjoy it a lot more. I mean, the bar scene before the games is great. You obviously had tailgating at the Coliseum, but I mean, the bars are packed with Islander fans. Granted, it's a playoff game; it's probably not like that every game of the year, but you still you still get that vibe that Islander fans are around you and you're having a good time. The training is fun, packed with Islander jerseys. The atmosphere itself, I mean, it was loud there, and we got some great memories there, which I think helps a lot because we have memories made there right from the get-go. and you know where you were in the Barclays Center when Tavares scored that overtime goal, and you'll always remember that roar. But I mean, honestly, as the season progressed, I couldn't complain too much. I mean, they started getting better with the way they handled things. I feel like the real tipping point was when Yormark told people to watch the game on their cell phones when if they were in obstructed seats. Vic's the last dumb thing he said. Maybe he learned to keep his mouth shut. But yeah, I mean, it's not ideal, but they made the most of it, in my opinion. So, I mean, next year, opening night in Brooklyn, I'm sure it'll be a great time. But any final thoughts from you guys?
No, I mean, obviously, I wish we were still playing, but that's not the case. And this is a huge offseason for this team. I think we all agree with that, and I'm genuinely intrigued and really looking forward to seeing how things play themselves out with this team because it is quite possible that we are looking at a substantially different team in October than we saw a week ago, and that it can be scary, but I also think that's a great opportunity and it's exciting because this team is in my opinion, they're on the precipice of taking the next step, and now it's up to management to make that happen.
Pete, I mean, you touched on it, Pete. The memory of Game 6, being in that building and watching Tavares wrap around the net, and that half second right before he tucked it in, realizing that wow, this is about to happen, and the anticipation and just the roar of the crowd and the complete jubilation, and really it was 23 years of frustration that essentially poured out of the 15,000 plus that were in the building that night. And that's the one cool thing about sports that you don't get anywhere else is that the reality of just the moment of seeing something happen that you don't anticipate to happen, and the celebration with with strangers, with who's jumping on the person in front of them, and who's run up and down the aisle high fiving everyone, and screaming at the top of your lungs. I mean, there's nothing like it. And at the very least this season, through everything else, a lot of ups and downs, they gave us that one big memory that, for you guys who are a little bit younger than me, was probably the first, real positive memory since maybe the Sean Bates penalty shot. Um, and to have it happen like that with the guy, like with the franchise guy, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it right now. That's how like a special moment it was, and nothing will ever take that away. So, regardless of all the other crap that they had to deal with this off season, and we all three of us acknowledge that they're going to have a lot to do. The issues they had during the season with the new arena, the drop in play, did they tank the last weekend of the season, all this other stuff, nothing can ever take away Game 6, that double overtime win. And like you said, we'll have that for as long as you're a fan. You will always remember that moment. And if I could bottle that up and carry it with me, I wish I would love to have it.
No, I mean, as a younger Islander fan, 21, before this, I mean, my main memories were the Bates penalty shot and Wade Dubowitz's poke check. And all the time I'd hear how sad it was that a regular season game is one of the better memories I have as a fan of this team. And I mean, just being there and watching it happen, I mean, I'm thankful for that because that's why we watch sports, man. Just for the memories and celebrating moments like that. It was 23 years in the making. A lot of people. That was their first. That was their first real Islander monumental moment. I mean, we've seen the Bates penalty shot. I mean, Tavares' goal in Game 3 of the first round last year was probably up there. But I mean, if you think about it, that's the first real moment where you tell someone where you are and you don't get laughed at. Is that's one of your big. I mean, still, it's only in the first round. You expect bigger, but finally, the Islanders gave me something that I've been waiting for my whole life.
And that's why when you look at this season individually, That's why this season is a success because that one play. I mean, you don't want to narrow it down to just one moment, but you kind of can in this case. And I was there too. Obviously, it was a crazy, crazy experience. It honestly felt like my entire fandom. When I became a fan in 1995, which was probably the absolute worst time to become an Islander fan because I literally saw every single bad year, and missed the last of like literally just missed the last of the good ones, and it really felt like it was 20 years of just general frustration just gone, just like that. And you look at a lot of people talk about Tavares and he wants to go to Toronto and this and that, but I'm telling you, you look at his face right after he scores that goal, like that is a guy that immediately understood the magnitude. It wasn't look, it was great for them. The players obviously had never been to the second round, and it was a huge moment for them. But he's on the ice, and the first thing he says is essentially like, "We know how big this was for the fans." And I think when you say it had to be the franchise guy, it really, really did have to be the franchise guy in this case. And Tavares has obviously, has had a few of these moments, but none bigger than that at this point. And I think I think to get back to like the overarching point, this team owes it to him to really make a move and get to the next level. He has been, I think it's safe to say he's been one of the most important players to ever play for this franchise at this point.
No, I'd agree with that. I mean, he gave us hope when times were bleak, and he's carried us from the bottom to, I guess, a little above the bottom. But I feel like he still has a waste. I feel like he still has more in him. So that'll wrap it up for us here tonight. Thank you for listening, not only tonight but all season long. As we alluded to, we'll probably do an off-season preview in the coming days, probably sometime next week. So keep an eye out for that. And
Check us and rate us on iTunes or SoundCloud. Make sure you do that. We love feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. We'd love to hear from you guys.
yeah, you could tell Carey how big of an idiot he is. Me and Mike love that.
Yeah, we definitely love that.
Well, thanks. Like Mike said, I'm all about criticism. So if you want to call me an idiot, that's fine.
Tell him to put the calculator down, close Excel, all the good ones, because you know
He's a nerd.
he's a nerd.
A lovable one though. All right, let's wrap this up. Thanks again for listening, everyone. We really appreciate it, and guess we'll talk next week.
Let's go, Islanders.